Good afternoon, Mark Sutton, HurricaneTrack.com here with your Hurricane Outlook and discussion for Friday, the 15th of July, 2016. The Atlantic Basin still nice and quiet. Nothing over the next several days. Nothing going to bother anybody this weekend, that's for sure. And the Eastern Pacific, even though it is still very active here, nothing going to bother anybody in this basin either. We have Hurricane Darby here, Tropical Depression 6E. That little E there means Eastern Pacific. Remember, the National Hurricane Center's area of responsibility is the Atlantic, Caribbean, and Gulf of Mexico, plus the Eastern Pacific out to 140 degrees longitude, I believe it is. So they have this area of responsibility as well. Looking at the track map for Darby, a hurricane over the open Pacific, and it will track west and then maybe south of due west eventually as it becomes more of a low-level swirl with the convection waning in the next several days. Why is it weakening? Well, generally speaking, the water temperatures decrease out this way, and the overall thermodynamic, atmospheric structure, all that good stuff, just not as supportive for this to keep going and going like we see with typhoons in the western Pacific, where they can just chug along for a while until they hit land. Interest in Hawaii, pay attention. This would not be much of a problem, potentially a rainmaker if it made it that far west and if it was still intact. Hawaii still off the screen over here by a good bit, so maybe by Monday this will be in the picture and we can discuss potential impacts, if any, at that point. Going to the east a little bit now, newly named Tropical Depression 6E, this too going to stay away from Mexico. That's several storms here. What do we have? This will eventually be, I think, Estelle, so that's A, B, C, D, E, 5, right? Named storms when this gets up there to become Estelle. I think that's the next name on the list in the Eastern Pacific that won't affect Mexico. So great news for the folks along the Pacific coast of Mexico. We know that this can be a different story altogether if these were to be turning. But high pressure over the western part of the North American continent and the Eastern Pacific, the Northeast Pacific, keeping these storms on a westerly course. And as I pointed out, and I'll show you this on satellite here, let me zoom in some, this track that these are taking over the same area will definitely take some of that upper ocean heat content out. And I'll show you that on Monday as those maps get updated further, and you'll see the impressive cold wakes left behind from these 5 different cyclones that have developed out of this sort of vorticity string that was left here from a very complicated weather phenomenon to explain. A convectively coupled Kelvin wave moved its way across the Pacific. It's almost like it died out over here and left its energy there. It's all very interesting and all complex, explaining the Madden-Julian oscillation and these CCKWs, these convectively coupled Kelvin waves. Basically the end result is what we're most interested in, at least in this forum, in this discussion, and that has been that it set off these different storms. But as I have pointed out, I do think that when these do cool the ocean, and they've already done so, I just want to show you a better representation of that on Monday when we get the new NOAA-NESDIS sea surface temperature anomalies chart that comes out. I think that's going to be possibly detrimental over on the Atlantic Basin side of things. Why? Well, if you have a contrast in water temperatures, that typically will focus the energy elsewhere. It can, at least. So if this water cools off and the water temperatures over here are undisturbed, and they certainly still are, and are warmer than they should be, and certainly warmer than over here, and I think as I'll show you Monday, that's going to be the case, that when this fires up, it should fire up more so, because you have a contrast in water temperatures. And you think about how warm the El Nino was last year in the Eastern Pacific, and it just cranked out powerful hurricane after powerful hurricane, whereas the Atlantic was colder through here, and so the contrast enhance the development over in the eastern Pacific. So we'll see if that theory holds water, no pun intended, that the cooling of the eastern Pacific in what is sort of their MDR, their main development region here, similar to what we have in the Atlantic Basin, that does this take over once we get into August and September? Hey, the good thing is we'll know one way or the other if my theory is correct. So moving on around the satellite tour, this is a visible satellite. These other ones I showed you were infrared, black and white, but this is a visible shot. Fairly impressive tropical wave here embedded within the Saharan air layer. Fairly active intertropical convergent zone, slowly migrating to the north as it does this time of year. And, everything is moving into position. It's only July 15th. We still have another month, believe it or not, another 30 days before we really start to open our eyes to the Atlantic tropical region. After about August 15th or so, the climatological clock really starts to tick, and we see an uptick with that in activity. So it's no surprise still that things are as quiet as they are. Now this is interesting. This is the actual sea surface temperature chart. This is updated every day, so this is valid yesterday, and we'll get today's tomorrow, so forth and so on. Check this out, though. You can clearly see the outline of the Gulf Stream right through here. But this right here, the 29 degrees Celsius isotherm, and you can see that right here, 29. It kind of breaks apart there a little bit, goes back, and it's butting up against the coast. We'll talk about this in a moment. But this right here is really impressive warm for so far north. That is 38 degrees latitude right there. And New York City is sitting up here just north of 40 degrees latitude. Long Island, New England, etc., not too far south of this very warm compared to normal and actual water temperature. Now, I know just as well as you do that the possibility that something comes along and takes advantage of that and barrels into New England, very remote. It's very remote in any given year. But when you do have this in the way of a potential north-moving hurricane later in the season, assuming that this water temperature profile stays the way it is, there's no guarantee of that either. But, this is, I don't want to say alarming, but you do have to take notice and just say, okay, well, if something does come that way, and, something could turn along the Gulf Stream and head out harmlessly, I know. But when you have this, you have to take notice, and I'm doing so, because it could be important later in the season. And as well, that very warm water, 29 degrees Celsius, butting up against the coastline here, the shelf water, and even down to the South Carolina, Georgia coast, 30 degrees Celsius. That is warmer than it should be. And when you have water temperatures with more energy than there usually is, then hurricanes can be stronger. Doesn't mean that they, will be there at all. I'm just balancing it all out here. I never ever like to play fearmonger, but when I see something that I have to take notice of, I'm definitely going to point it out. And I think that helps to create a little bit more awareness than saying, oh, there's nothing to worry about. Just stick your head in the sand and forget about it until somebody tells you that you need to worry. Believe me, if you need to worry, you'll know. And right now you don't. It's just something to take note of. And again, here on the tropical cyclone heat potential map, it's got a little closed off area itself, showing that, yep, there's some ocean heat content in there that's a little bit more than usual. And you can clearly see the outline of the Gulf Stream with lower values of TCHP, or upper ocean heat content, tropical cyclone heat potential, whatever way you want to call it. Let me zoom in on this too. Look at that. I mean, that's really impressive there for so far to the north. And this could get eroded away if we get some strong offshore flow with troughs going by or whatever. But so far, that's not been the case. We've had this big heat dome, as you're very well aware of, over the east, very hot as of late. The rest of the upper ocean heat content, very impressive, as it should be, some of this more so than normal. But again, nothing out there right now to take advantage of it. And it could mathematically remain that way. It's not, impossible to think that there would be no hurricanes threatening land this year. I think we, are probably kidding ourselves if we think that nothing's going to happen, but I just want to balance it out, that I'm not saying this is doom and gloom, but these are pieces of the puzzle that are important if a hurricane comes along. And I think that's the best way to put it. Nothing going to come along anytime soon. The Saharan air layer pretty dominant, but you can clearly see, let me draw in yellow here, that it is being eroded in here as more moisture comes out. The strongest of the Saharan air outbreaks now north of 20 degrees latitude. So things are changing. These tropical waves getting more robust. This is definitely a high amplitude tropical wave curled up in here. It's just surrounded by very dry mid-level air and the Saharan dust around it. So it's choked off for the time being, probably make its way over to the west, more than likely ending up in the eastern Pacific before it develops, but more moisture coming behind it. And as I pointed out, the intertropical convergence zone migrating north, right on schedule. I haven't seen anything to show that it's slower than normal this year or more aggressive than normal, etc. So things are pretty much where they should be. Now, I want to show you this. This is kind of a nice little lesson in how things can change. This is the GFS valid basically this evening for the eastern seaboard. For example, 0 UTC would be about 8 o'clock Eastern time tonight. This is an isobar, or a line of equal pressure, and this happens to be the 1016 millibar isobar, as I draw and trace that for you so you can see it. This one is 1020. It's kind of like a topographic map of the atmosphere. If you know geology and geography, you have mountains that have topography, and the same thing with these contour lines here. These represent sort of the weight of the air on the earth, is a good way to look at it. These mountains of air and these troughs of air. And when you have these mountains of air, you have higher pressure. And the 1016 millibar line is dipping down into the main development region through here, so pressures are a little higher than they should be. The trades are just a little stronger, and that certainly is promoting the Saharan air outbreaks as the subtropical ridge, as this is collectively known, is a little stronger than it should be. Absolutely. Now look what happens, as an example here, in 2 weeks. The 1016 millibar line is now north of 20 degrees north latitude. It's hard to find it. There we go. And now you see lower pressures down here. 1009 millibars there, 1012 millibars, lower pressure over Africa, and you have more moisture coming across in the main development region. Now, this could not, this may not pan out. This is the 384-hour GFS. Some people like to use this when there's a hurricane on it or a big snowstorm in winter or whatever. I'm just showing you how things can change, and I think that the overall pattern shows where we're headed. That right now we have SAL, the Saharan air layer, higher than normal pressures, but in a couple of weeks, right here at the end of the month, as we should expect, those pressures just begin to ease off a little bit, and then this area starts to open up for more tropical wave action to survive longer, more humidity in that region, etc. It's all a process and an evolutionary process throughout each year. I've seen so many posts on a few message boards of people thinking that, man, that's just a repeat of the last several years. It's not like people want to be railroaded with a hurricane, but this fascination with the weather and seeing a hurricane out there is interesting to a lot of people, and they begin to wonder, is there anything that's going to happen? And it's the ultimate watching the pot boil kind of scenario with the internet and being able to access all of this data every time new data comes out, and you still don't see what you're looking for. You're looking to track these very beasts right here, and when there are none to track, you just become a little antsy. It's kind of like in college basketball. Your favorite team is in the national championship. Your star player hasn't hit a single three-pointer in the first 5 minutes of the game, and you start to worry a little bit, right? That's the best I can come up with for today, because I like college basketball, so there you go. But seriously, August and September, probably going to be busy in the Atlantic Basin. Climatology suggests that, and just what we see with all the warm water the lack of El Nino, the lower pressures that are coming, the lack of the wind shear that we saw last year, logic would dictate that if you live along the coast, you better be prepared, because this season is more than likely going to mean business once we get into the prime time of mid-August through about the end of October. So there you go. Nothing to worry about this weekend, though, so have a great one at that. I'll try to do the same myself. Going to do something fun with the family, hopefully. And I recommend you do the same, all right? And be safe out there, as always. Hey, thanks for tuning in. I do appreciate your time and attention. As usual, I am Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com, and I'll talk to you again on Monday.